What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Alive Podcast. My name is Dale. Welcome to Manor Road Studio. And I always start off with what you see in the back. When you feel like quitting, remember why you started. These podcasts are totally raw, totally unedited, and what I say I can't take back. So I'm learning to live alive, which means authentic, love, imagination, victor, and evolve. And my goal in these podcasts is for you to learn to live alive as well, to shed some of the fallacies, if you will, that may have molded you throughout the years. The things that as you were growing up, you had dreams and wishes and all kinds of things. And then as you got older, for whatever reason, you were taught that as an adult, dreams aren't as allowed because we have this weird thing called responsibility. Well, I want to try to tear the skin off that and give you the opportunity to live again, to explore again, and to reach out and study things that at one time you may have thought was apostate to even study. You saw the name of the podcast, which is Revelation, the Church, and King James. And I really enjoy the book of Revelation because I enjoy reading the Bible, even though I'm the most non-religious person you'll ever meet. I do not like organized religion, even though I have nothing against local churches because I think they do a lot of good in our communities. There's a lot of benevolence, a lot of love, a lot of charity. Without them, we probably wouldn't have. But when it comes to the rubrics, the dogma, the doctrines of organized religion, I have a problem with it. Or maybe I should say I have a problem with the hierarchy that's in these organized religions. Because when you go back to when a lot of these religions originated, what you see today is nothing but a shell of what they were intended to be. And I think the people that originated them would roll over in their grave if they could see what has become of it. Because a lot of it's just a big money-making power machine that wants you to believe anything they can make you to believe that will have you pour more money into their causes or their efforts. So with that being said, when it comes to the book of Revelations, I'm going to ask you to study it. And I mean study the historicity of it. Study it from, let's just say, study it from the way it was written somewhere. We know it was written somewhere between 95 and 105. We're not real sure. A lot of different scholars say differently. We know it was written by a gentleman named John. Some call him John the Elder. Some call him John of Patmos. We have an inkling, being that he says it in the first chapter, that he was writing from the prison of Patmos. We don't know if he was in prison there or if he was preaching to the prison there. But nevertheless, Revelation was written in a symbolic apocalyptic language that was extremely popular during the late first century and second century. And it's a language that we're not familiar with today as much as they were familiar with then. But for the most part, for the first 1800 years of the church, they took Revelation to mean as much as they could think of it meant to the gentleman that wrote it. Because John that wrote it was obviously writing to an audience then. He wasn't writing to an audience in 2021. He didn't know 2021 would ever even get here. He had no clue except what was going on around him at the time. Revelation was never written, intended to be some prophecy for 2,000 years later. But I want you to study that. Don't take my word for it. I want you to really study it, the historicity of it, with an open mind. Don't believe what you've been told. And for God's sakes, don't believe none of the prophets you see on YouTube or on Facebook, because they are false prophets. I think that was real apparent during the election. We saw all of them, all the Christian so-called prophets prophesied one thing, and we know that we got something totally different. And yet, instead of them saying they were wrong, they were still trying to spin it in a way to assume that they were right. The church, I've already kind of spoken about there. I am a believer in local churches. I'm just not a believer in the hierarchy of organized religion. I walked away from religion about 8 years ago. And since then, I've been able to live more authentically than I was ever able to live before, because I felt like I was trying to adhere to something that I didn't believe in to start with, but I acted like I did. It's kind of like I heard this thing one time where this guy in a Pentecostal church, these kids were told that, well, you can't fully become a Christian. I may get this wrong. It's more of a joke than anything, until you learn to speak in tongues, or you can't fully understand or accept the gospel until you learn to speak in tongues. So these kids were walking up to the altar, and one of the kids looked at the priest and said, I don't know how to speak in tongues. What am I supposed to do? The priest turned back to him and said, fake it like we all do, or preacher, or whatever they call them. But you get the message. A lot of this stuff is bull crap. We know it's bull crap. But for a lot of people, it's shaped their lives in a tremendously negative way. And that's one of the things that I guess I'm trying to convey in my own way. But like I said, this is for entertainment only. It's just my opinion. I don't claim to be right about everything, and I want you to do your due diligence. I think the thing I said after Revelation and the church was King James. Growing up, I guess King James was the go-to Bible for, I guess, dang near every Protestant religion. And anything other than that, if you go back 30 or 40 years, was apostate. Now we do have several versions of the Bible that aren't King James, but for the most part, King James is still probably the most widely read and accepted, which is fine, because what I want to say, the sanctity of the man, which is what I want to talk about, doesn't necessarily have any effect on the work. So I'm not here to condemn the King James Bible, because King James himself didn't write it. He authorized it to be written, and he did have a lot of input that I question, but that's neither here nor there. What I want you to do is study King James. Find out why he wanted to write the Bible or translate the Bible into a more modern English language. He wasn't the first to do that. I think the Geneva Bible was the first to translate the English language. That's neither here nor there. This isn't for history purposes. But I want you to learn more about King James and his life. A lot of people worship King James as a saint. He was so much not one of those. He facilitated in the torture and execution of so-called witches at the time. He was fixated on witches. And being that he was a king, he had male courtiers, as they called them, male concubines, if you would, or male lovers. Whatever you want to say doesn't matter. There is historical proof of that. And that's what I want you to research. That way, when people start talking about King James this or that, let's make sure they know what they're talking about. Because King James certainly wasn't a saint himself. But again, I'm not saying that his work wasn't good. And it kind of brings to mind a quote I heard years ago. Of course, I was Catholic up till about 8 years ago, but in Catholic, Methodist, Lutheran, and there's a few others, have what's called sacraments. And this is an important quote. The state of grace of a person receiving a sacrament does not depend on the state of grace of the person conferring it. Meaning, just because some low-life, egg-sucking dog conferred a sacrament on you doesn't mean the sacrament wasn't valid. I'm saying that to say this. Yes, I did a lot of study on King James, which I've done for years, and no, I'm not a fan of King James the person. But if you're a reader in King James version of the Bible, please continue to do so. I am not in no means advocating that his translation of the Bible is good or bad. All I'm asking people to do when it comes to Revelations, the church, and King James is do your due diligence, do your research with an open mind. And I think when you do that, you'll see the humanity of a lot of things. And you'll also sit back and go, man, why am I letting some of this stuff control my life? I want to be authentic too. I want to learn to live authentic. I want to learn to love myself again. I want to learn to have a vivid imagination, to dream again. I want to be a victor, not have a victim mentality. And I want to evolve, that is, into the best version of myself possible. And the only way you can do that is kind of, shed some of those chains that have been binding you for so damn many years. I want to hear from you. I'm here for you. Find me on Facebook, Dale Childress. I do a podcast there daily called A Dose of Dale. And all it is about learning to become your authentic self, whatever that may mean. And it means something different for everyone. I would love your opinions and thoughts on things. I respect them. There's room at the table for all of us. There's room at the table for every opinion. None of us are right or wrong. We will all probably fall somewhere in between. But I do want to hear from you. So leave me a comment here. Give me a thumbs up. Hit that like button. Subscribe. Share me with your family and friends. Catch me on Facebook tomorrow for A Dose of Dale. And I do these podcasts about every 2 weeks. So about every week. Forgive me for that. So I'll see you soon.